Cinema Classics is brought to you by the Gateway Film Center, 1550 North High Street, Columbus, Ohio. Further details and showtimes online at gatewayfilmcenter.com.
The award-winning Cinema Classics is produced by John DeSando and Johnny DiLoretto, who by extension are award winners. Listen to our shows online at WCBE.org.
I'm John DeSando.
And I'm Johnny DiLoretto. And this is Cinema Classics, and we are at the Gateway Film Center.
And let me not obscure. It would be impossible to, in real life, obscure that character.
Right.
There is a new biography of Marlon Brando.
Have you read it?
Of course not. I've only read a reference to it.
Read it.
No, I don't.
That's probably a monstrous tome.
But Brando's Smile, His Life, Thought, and Work by Susan Mitsuruki. And she is a professor at Boston University. And this is from an article in Atlantic recently by Tom Schoen, in which he says how Brando broke the movies.
Oh, please. What did he say? Sum that up for me. How Brando broke the movies?
Brando, right off of his hot Broadway successes, had 3 or 4 in the 50s and 60s super films, and each one he negotiated himself.
Oh, so he didn't have an agent.
No, well, he didn't. He wasn't associated with any studio. So in other words, he went out he might have had an agent, but basically he was on his own and he was thriving.
I see. So what you're saying is that he played a part in the downfall of the studio system.
Got it.
Which completely fell apart in the late 60s, early 70s.
That's exactly right.
I got it.
So my question to you, because we're both Brando fans in one way or the other, and arguably, he's the greatest film actor of all time. Now, that's
except for Jimmy Stewart, but go ahead.
and for Daniel Day-Lewis. So you can begin thinking of great actors, but you have to put Johnny Depp in the mix because
I don't
he was very close friends with Brando, who even recommended that he buy an island. The way Brando did, and I think he did.
I think Brando just found a quirky compadre. And he didn't want to be on that island by himself. Or he was plotting to eat Johnny Depp.
Anyway, for those original movies, my gosh, in the early stages of his life.
Here, listen. Everybody we talked about On the Waterfront, Streetcar Named Desire, Viva Zapata, The Men.
The Men is one I don't know well. It's quadriplegic stuff.
Yeah, it was very early. It was a sort of a kind of bracing look at somebody injured in the war, and it hadn't really been done before. And Brando went to, as he was, want to do, he immersed himself, put himself in a wheelchair.
Right on.
At the time, it was a pretty original work.
So some would say that with the method acting that he had become the leading exponent of, he was
with James Dean.
With James Dean, but I think when you ask somebody, more than often than not, they'll say Brando is, and although he has disparaging things,
it's only because he lived. Wouldn't that be fascinating? It's only because Brando lived that we talk about him as the leading proponent of the method.
Lived meaning?
Survived. He didn't die. James Dean died after 3 films.
I see. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Paul Newman, equally what do you?
You're putting Newman with Brando?
Yeah. Is that a joke?
Yeah. I mean, you can't be serious.
I'm dead serious.
You think there's any comparison between the range of Marlon Brando and that of Paul Newman?
Yes.
Oh boy. Well, let me say this. Newman is more of a standard actor, even though he is method. He is where Brando is more of a naturalist with his.
Well, let me say this. This is interesting. Now, see, things get interesting. Brando was an affected performer. As interesting and compelling and natural as he was, he relied on certain sort of tics and techniques that Paul Newman never had to lean on. I believe that Paul Newman's performance in HUD is every bit as great as Brando's performance in On the Waterfront. Now, all the things that Brando gets credit for, and I've probably said this before on this show, all these tics and nuances that he gets credit for discovering or letting the spectator in on, I think were all done by Jimmy Stewart 20 years, 20
So what
years before.
is this a comedy show or is this for real?
No, it's for real.
Oh.
Jimmy Stewart displayed the attributes of naturalism and realism that we associate with Brando long before Brando did.
Okay, okay.
Now, he just didn't come in that package, and those movies weren't about, like, guys ratting out the mob or anything like that. So Jimmy Stewart's accomplishments are lost in the Hollywood classical era.
Looking at Brando as we are, Brando smolders on the screen. If he's not playing a Mexican general where he can be, or One-Eyed Jacks where he can be flamboyant,
Yeah.
when he plays the Godfather, he's dynamite, subtle dynamite in that role.
Right.
And I don't believe your actors ever achieved that kind of terrible subtlety that he had in The Godfather. He forever became the Godfather of all film in that time.
Interesting. That's interesting. You're right. Well, that's a character role.
Yeah.
And, he doesn't have a lot of screen time. He is indelible, there's no doubt. However, what's interesting about that is that Brando had fallen so far as a star at that point.
Yeah.
So much so that the studio did not want Francis Ford Coppola to cast Brando, fought against that casting tooth and nail, forced Brando to do a screen test, which was unheard of for a star of his magnitude. I would argue that hadn't Brando fallen so far, he wouldn't have been offered a character part in the first place.
Okay.
And that's why you don't see Paul Newman doing anything like that. And hands down, the actor who made more great films is Paul Newman.
Wow. All right.
The show has devolved into
I know,
something you didn't want.
Sure. No.
You brought this on.
Let me interject by saying there's a certain Wellesian tragedy about Brando,
True.
as we know.
Because he was so great, he got fat. Like his notion of himself became so outsized that the only way he could fill it was to physically take up that space.
What a nice metaphor. He was just an appetitive man, and he loved ice cream and hot dogs, and he could be caught anytime at 3 in the morning.
Some self-loathing, though. Do you think?
Well,
somebody who destroys their beauty like that.
His dad used to beat him, among other things, and I think he was a military guy. His father.
His father, I don't know.
Yeah. And so theoretically, he's fighting his father through his whole. In fact, shown in this article says that there's 2 Brandos, the one who plays himself and the one who plays his father.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I mean, this is deeply psychological, but in the end, and I don't disagree with you about the affectations, and I'll be darned if I don't criticize him for this whole mumblecore thing.
Huh.
Mumbling was, I think, the hallmark of that. What should we say?
See, I never thought he was mumbling. I mean, I think it was perceived as mumbling because it was more quiet. It wasn't theatrical. It was, but you understand everything.
Yeah, it was. It had its place in giving the naturalistic look. It was standard actor studios fare, I think,
Right.
to bring it down, to mumble as if you were just feeling this character, dredging him up from your past. You become him, and therefore you're talking to yourself. You're mumbling just like a person walking down the street who's slightly crazed might do. And where I'm criticizing him is for starting this whole thing, because I hate the mumblecore business, because I'm a language guy.
Well,
and I
but
want every
again,
word.
That bring. Oh, jeez, you're falling apart over there.
No.
The papers. That brings us back to James Dean.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can have a conversation about what they did to movies without talking about both of them. I like this little metaphor. I thought one day when I was watching East of Eden once, that James Dean was so raw, and I mean emotionally raw, and so nerve-jangly, that he seemed to me to be what would come out of Marlon Brando if you cracked him open.
Nice.
You cracked Brando
Okay.
open like an egg,
Yeah.
out falls James Dean.
Okay.
Brando's musculature is what kind of, and that sort of beefiness is what keeps you at emotional bay.
Sure. And everybody.
then when it breaks open, it's really powerful. That's That's what I think made De Niro and Pacino so attractive as young movie stars. They were carrying the Brando torch. They were tough exteriors, soft interiors, explosive interiors.
I think he benefited enormously his whole life, Brando did, from his role in Streetcar Named Desire. And I think that beefiness you're talking about, the real musculature, was something that carried him through to the point where when he became bloated, everybody remembered
the beauty
that he was.
Right. I'm sure that
he had more books in his library than most academics.
Okay.
And he worked on his scripts. Now, first of all, he would not memorize. So he had the lines tacked up all over the place, on the baby's diaper, everywhere, because he said it actually pulled him away from the naturalism that he wanted to. So he never would memorize.
Art-altering talent squanders it and burns it away.
Orson Welles.
And then Orson Welles.
Yeah.
Or catch it, like
which is not going to happen.
Another guy who, by the way, had such an outsized sense of himself that he got physically large to fill the space that the idea of him took up.
Who?
Orson Welles.
Oh, Welles, yeah. Now I'm thinking that won't happen to Daniel Day-Lewis, who was way too controlled in his performance.
Right, and that's the difference, right? Daniel Day-Lewis is a genius, no doubt about it. His performances are searing. His performances are, you can't take your eyes off of him. He creates distinct characters from movie to movie. His Bill the Butcher in Gangs of New York is distinctly different from his Natty Bumppo from Last of the Mohicans, distinctly different from his There Will Be Blood character. They're each they exist in their own thing, and they're not, the only thing they have in common is how vastly different they are from role to role. Now, in order to do that, he has to, I think, there's a great deal of artifice there. It's guys and girls like Paul Newman that don't rely on that. Although HUD is clearly a much different character than Cool Hand Luke, who's clearly a much different character than Butch Cassidy. Now, maybe they're not as drastically different, but what he does in each of those films, The Hustler, and Somebody Up There Likes Me, they're different.
How about the score?
Yeah, but we're back to Brando again. Yeah, that was great. Finally, after 30 years or 20 years, Brando and De Niro share the screen together and make this crappy.
Don't either.
Brando is soul stirring.
Yeah.
He is soul stirring. When you see him in On the Waterfront, when you see him in, arguably, Edward G. Robinson just popped into my head as a movie star who, when he played a bad guy, and James Cagney, when those guys played bad guys, you still were enamored of them. You still were captivated by them. In the same way, and probably in a different way, because Brando is so sexually alluring to, a lot of people.
Marilyn Monroe among them.
But Brando in Streetcar Named Desire is a lot like that. He was maybe the first really beautiful bad guy.
Yeah. Okay.
And, that allowed us access to his interior already that maybe we were denied movie stars prior to that.
Well, anyway, he's dead, but I'm beginning to mumblecore now.
Oh, man. Well, this show is all over the place. I wish you luck in the editing process.
Yes.